morning and welcome back to the Writing While Black podcast. I'm Ayoka B. My co-host Angela is here with me, and
What's up?
today we are so excited to have Emely Rumble with us. I don't know if you know Em, but get to know her if you don't. Em is a licensed clinical social worker. She is a school social worker. She's a psychotherapist, and I won't say most importantly, but I'm going to say most importantly, she is a bibliotherapist. And this really fascinated me because, I guess I'm behind the curve. I hadn't heard of this before I started following Em on IG, and I've been following her for a while, but I was so fascinated by this because as a kid, I always had a book. And just growing up as a reader, when I became an adult and I've done therapy and all the things, I had never thought, or well, books have helped me, but I did not know that there was literally a practice called bibliotherapy. So I was fascinated with this, and I was like, she would be a great guest. And she's an author, so there's that. So welcome, Emely Rumble. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me to the pod. I'm so happy to be here with y'all. Woo, woo.
Good. So I told Angela last night, I was like, I want to lead today because I got a lot of questions. And she was like, she answered with the eyeballs, like, okay, let's go. So, okay, first, can you share with everyone who's watching or listening the distinction between I just want to get some medical terms out there. Psychotherapist and therapist. Can you make the distinction between those two titles?
Yeah. Well, in my experience, I think it really just depends on the person who's practicing and how they would identify themselves. I think for a lot of folks, it depends on how you were trained. So I'm trained, I went to school, Smith College School for Social Work. So I was trained on a psychoanalytic track, which is very Freudian, very psychodynamic in nature, really looking at the early childhood experiences of an individual, our unconscious, right? And how that shows up in our behaviors and our attitudes and our actions. And so I say psychotherapist because of the way that I was trained classically through like a psychodynamic lens. But I could also say therapist, I guess, depending on what room I'm in or who I'm in conversation with, I use those terms interchangeably. But there's also, even with bibliotherapy being a particular modality of psychotherapy, there are people who are specialized in somatic therapy. They really focus on work with the body. There are people who are sound practitioners and they really specialize in like music therapy. And so I think it really just depends on like who you are and how you identify, how you name yourself. So I tend to use both.
Okay. Okay. Well, you offered a perfect segue. I want you to talk about bibliotherapy and how you got started with bibliotherapy.
Absolutely. So I didn't even know that bibliotherapy was a modality that you could train in as a mental health professional until graduate school. But just like y'all, I grew up at the library, all the time, reading books all the time. I had a really chaotic childhood. My parents were teen parents, and so my mother's mother raised me, and she passed when I was 14. I entered foster care. I was always a very deeply intuitive little girl with a really rich inner life. And so I didn't even really intend to become a therapist. I attended a high school, the Greater Hartford Academy of Performing Arts, where I specialized in creative writing. And my mentor there, Pamela Nomura, I want to make sure I say her name right. She was the one to tell me, Emily, there's actually people who work as like poetry therapists or book therapists, like people who are supporting not just young people, but like people who are trained as mental health professionals, incorporating the use of expressive writing and literature for healing purposes. And because I was using this for my own personal healing, that really interested me. And so I end up going to college, getting my bachelor's of arts at Mount Holyoke College in English language and literature with a specialization in African and Caribbean lit. And then my junior year, I get a scholarship to study in England. So I go to England And I'm not talking about London. I'm talking about York, England, which is close to Ireland. It's like
Oh, wow.
a very small, all white
I was gonna say very
town.
white.
Very white. So here I am, this African American Puerto Rican girl from New York City, coming into the University of York. And I don't know, this is completely new to me. I had never been on an airplane before studying abroad in England, and I was an exchange student, so I didn't go with a group of folk. But the good thing about that journey for me was that it opened up so many doors, not just for me to get to know myself, but also for me to take like risks that maybe I would have never taken, in my day-to-day life back home. And so I connected with a bunch of professors there in the English department who really took an interest in me and developing me and my creative writing gifts. And someone introduced me to the work of Ella Berthoud, who is a world-renowned bibliotherapist from, I think she's from Bath, England, but don't quote me on that. I'm not sure. I know that she is British. So I end up studying British bibliotherapists like Ella Berthoud, Susan Elderkin, who's also an author. Ella and Susan have co-written The Novel Cure, which is a book that contains book prescriptions for different life ailments. And so that, all of these seeds are sort of being planted into me. And when I decide to pursue my master's, I decided to pursue a master's in social work. Because at the time I had all these dreams, right, as a foster kid, that I was going to have a home for Black and brown girls who were foster kids. And I kind of like had this dream of what I wanted to do with a social work degree. But then I get placed my first internship at a day treatment facility for adults with schizophrenia. And I'm asked to facilitate a socialization group. So I'm thinking, okay, what can I do with these clients to get them to want to come to the program, And this is in the Bronx. So a lot of my clients were, former B-boys, poets, spoken word artists. Like they're mentally ill at the moment that I'm meeting them, but they're also very gifted artistically. And so I decided I'm going to do a poetry therapy group. And at first, my supervisor was like, Emily, how are you going to do poetry therapy with people who are actively, psychotic? And I'm like, well, little did people know that growing up in my grandmother's house, my maternal aunt who lived with me was my babysitter. She was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. So I had a reference point for working with folks who struggled with psychosis. And I also felt like, well, they deserve to have some creativity in this program. Everything shouldn't be about healing and taking your medication. And so I was like, you want me to create a socialization group? They have to want to come and hang out with each other. They have to look forward to coming and participating in group. And a lot of them were already creatives, right? They were writing song lyrics, poetry. Even if this was past versions of themselves, I thought it'd be really cool to try poetry therapy with them. And so I got books from the 99-cent store, notebooks. I came in every week with a poem. We started off small with like a stanza from Walt Whitman, and I write about this in my debut book. And honestly, the clients loved it. They loved it. They started writing their own poetry. They started reciting their own poetry in group. It got so popular that the director of the program had pulled me aside and she was like, who taught you this? Like, how, like, where'd you come up with this? And I was like, well, this is just something that I wanted to try because I saw this happening in different communities that I've been a part of. And I just wanted to see if it would land well with the clients. And it did. So she was like, whatever your plan is for your profession as a clinician, you should pursue this. Like, you're really good at this. And so that was really encouraging. And that's what I did. I got connected with different folks at the International Federation for Bibliopoetry Therapy, started taking courses and just learning everything I could. A lot of it was like just me teaching myself too, because also, these credentialing programs that cost money, time, energy, right? Resources that I didn't have. I don't come from wealth. So that's really how it started out. Those are the early roots, but I share in depth more of that story in the book.
Okay. I know you said you have worked with the bibliotherapy and just the creative arts, infusing it with the mental health and wellness with both adults and children. Can you talk a little bit about the schoolwork that you've done? I mean, just broad strokes, what you can share.
Yes. Yeah. No, I love being able to start this journey in schools because literacy in our country, right, is a big issue. And our children are not reading, right? We've made it so that all of our public education is so focused on like standardization and preparing, teaching to the test. And so I loved that being a school social worker in the Bronx, I was really able to work with kids in the classroom. A lot of kids don't want to come out of the classroom for counseling. So there's a lot of shame involved in like, what? At the time, I was Miss Velez, my maiden name. So I'd be like, Miss Velez is coming to get me. No, I don't see Miss Velez. And like my students would be very afraid of anyone finding out that they had a mandatory counseling with me. So I would just start pushing in, to classrooms and helping ELA teachers make stories come to life in the classroom. So we would end up doing a lot of just interacting with the text creatively. So getting the students to role play scenarios in the fiction text that we were reading, or getting them to rewrite, right, the endings of stories. They were clearly very emotionally invested in a lot of the stories that we would read. And that's always what bibliotherapy is about. Like, we want to work with the emotions that get elicited when we're reading. So getting students to be like, well, what do you think about the way she handled that conflict? Oh, you didn't like the way she handled it. What would you have done? Right? If you would have done X, Y, or Z, what would the outcome have been? Right. So we're also teaching like critical thinking skills while we're teaching reading comprehension, but we're making it fun. Even getting kids like, okay, let's write a letter to this character. If you could give this character feedback on how they handled the situation, or just, wanted to share a little something about how you can relate to the path that this character was on, the hero's journey that this character was on, what would you say? And teachers loved it because they started getting support in the classroom, right? Like, teachers deal with a lot in classrooms. They're very isolated. They're managing behavior while they're trying to teach, while they're getting observed, so there's a lot going on. So it was a win for me, a win-win for them, because I was able to build rapport with my students, destigmatize mental health in the classroom, eventually build relationships with the kids where they could get to know me, and eventually get them into the counseling room with me without there being that heavy stigma. And also the teachers got to learn a little bit about the intersection between literacy and mental health, and how they can make what they're teaching in the classroom, how they can teach character, right? Character, moral lessons. Like, it's not just, can this child read? We don't just want the kids to read. We want them to understand what they're reading. We want them to think critically about what they're reading. And so that's my favorite part of my career. And honestly, I miss school social work every day. When people ask me, like, what do I see for the future of literacy, what I want to do, I really want to create programs to go into schools and do more of that work. I had to leave my work as a school social worker once I became a mom. My son was diagnosed with autism. And my daughter was born in 2020 at the height of the pandemic. And so I had to like pivot, right? And so now I do private practice full time. But in the future, as my kids get older, I absolutely want to go back into schools.
Oh, I can tell you're passionate about it, and we need
Oh my goodness. I love working in
we
schools.
need
I
it,
love working with the kids. Yeah.
and our kids need it. Our
Yes.
community needs it because as a therapist and as a reader, how much reading gives to us. Yes, it's about literacy. We need our children to be comfortable with reading and embrace and love reading, but there's
Yeah.
so many other benefits that come out of reading. And so if we can have early readers, that's the best, because they're going to keep that love for reading. Even if you put it to the side for a while, eventually you come back to it because you remember what it made you feel like, that reading. So,
Absolutely.
and here, of course, the other side of that coin is the writers who write what we're reading and who shape these worlds that we're reading. So I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to turn it over to Angela because I'm monopolizing the conversation. But what are you reading right now?
Oh my goodness, so many good books, so many good books. So right now I'm reading Gather Me by Glory Edom. founder of Well Read Black Girl. I'm rereading it because I finally got my finished copy, and I just love that book so much. She really talks about how she founded Well Read Black Girl, why she founded it, and just how literature has been healing in her own journey. I just love the book so much. So I'm rereading that one. I'm reading The Healing Power of African American Spirituality, which I love. I always try to have like a memoir, a fiction, and a nonfiction in rotation. I'm a poly reader, so I read, a lot of books at once. And I just finished Skin and Bones by Renee Watson. That's probably my favorite fiction read of the year. It's so good, ladies. If you haven't read it, please do yourself a favor and pick that book up.
List.
It's rich, it's real, it's Black womanhood, it's Black motherhood, it's community healing, it's everything. It's everything. And there's surprisingly a lot of history in that book about Portland, about the history of the city of Portland and Black folks' contributions to Portland. So I learned a lot reading that one.
Okay. I can't, my brain, I got to focus on one book, Em. I can't do more than one. And then I remember someone saying, well, maybe you should try, and I'm not going to because I want to focus on one book. But they were like, if you do one that's audio and then the other that's physical, it's a different. I get it, but no, I want to focus on one book.
You like to go deep.
Yeah.
You like to go deep. I love that though, because every now and then I will pick up a book that just fully immerses me, and it doesn't matter what, because I'm always reading because I'm a bibliotherapist, right? So sometimes it's also like reading books to curate for clients or to curate for other folks who hire me, to curate for their presentations and stuff. But sometimes I'll pick up a book and it just immerses me so deeply that everything else gotta wait. And I love when that happens because I'm reading so much in volume all the time that I really rarely get the chance to go deep or to just like focus in on one text. So I love that you read that way. I prefer to read that way. I actually miss being able to read that way because of the work that I do. I get that.
Okay. Angela, it's on you. It's all you.
All right. So this is my question. I'm going to try to set it up. But this is a question. Okay. So like when I work with aromatherapy, I didn't go deep. I went kind of broad, but I quickly realized, okay, lavender is pretty accessible. Lavender is good for so many things. Almost anybody can use it. You don't have to worry about a carrier oil. Or with health related stuff like physical health. A lot of times, a lot of us just need, well, I shouldn't say just need to drink water, but we would greatly benefit from simply drinking more water. A lot of people, dehydration is a thing. So I'm sort of curious, like I'm not a doctor, so I can't prescribe water and I can't say, oh, work with lavender if you want to start with an essential oil, although I can. But if you were to prescribe one book for Black folks, just a general book that would have a good impact on most people, and and it's pretty accessible or maybe pretty significant, what book or books would you prescribe?
Ooh, I like this question.
I love that question. Lord.
Would it be like the doctor told us we got to at least
read?
Right.
Yeah. Do you have a preference in terms of fiction or nonfiction?
I mean, if you can think of, right, I was gonna say, if you can think of, yeah.
Well,
and you can to it.
I was gonna say, I wish y'all would have sent me that question in advance because I would have had a whole prescription for y'all. But immediately what comes to mind is Playing in the Dark by Toni Morrison, where she writes about being a Black woman in publishing, mentoring other Black writers, and really asking us as writers to release the need to write for the white gaze. I think that book is really important, not just for writers, but for Black folks in general, because we live in such a supremacist society and it impacts us, whether we acknowledge it or not. We're not looking for validation or the best reflection of self in the white gaze. That's actually very harmful to our mental health. So I would highly recommend Playing in the Dark by Toni Morrison. Sisters of the Yam, I think would benefit. Sisters of the Yam by Bell Hooks. This is a book about Black women's wellness and the way that we need one another to heal, especially to be in community with one another. But I also think Black men and just like non-binary Black folks could benefit from it too, because Bell Hooks in general just gives us a true ethic of love as practice, as politic to live through, that really helps to like anchor us in who we are as a community, and what we need to heal. And then I'm gonna recommend this book because I love this book so much. It's a new release. I had the privilege of speaking with Sibo Campbell about his new fiction book, Sky Full of Elephants.
It's full of elephants.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. When I tell you, I read that book 3 times with different clients, but also for myself. It was one of my book club picks at Readers Who Run with the Wolves book club on Fable. It's a free book club. Anybody could join. And I will say this book is activating for people because it's dystopian in nature. It's very Afro-futuristic, and I think it kind of goes over some people's heads, right? Because they can't see past all the white people die, right? For some people, that's very activating. Like, what? All the white people die? Like, why? What's going on? Who killed? And it's like, no, they drown and they walk into the nearest body of water and they drown. And Siebel talks a lot during his interviews about the book around why he needed to create a scenario that would remove the white gaze without it being like overtly violent or about seeking recompense. Like he didn't want that to be the narrative. He wanted to create a world where this formerly incarcerated Black man was able to access healing and redemption for himself. So it bothers me that like people focus so much on like the white people ain't here, y'all, because the book is so rich and it's so well done. And when we think about redemption, like I really think even as a mental health professional in today's day and age, I think we've lost the point that like if people are not redeemable, then what do we really have? Right? Like we're human beings on a human journey. We all make mistakes. We all have to evolve, right? We all hopefully get a chance to self-actualize before spirit takes us home. And so what Sibo Campbell does in Sky Full of Elephants is just, whew, if you're a reader who loves Black literature, you got to read Sky Full of Elephants at least once in your life. So that's what I would say. And I could go on, but those are the 3 that I immediately come to mind.
That's good. I looked on your website because I'm like, wait, you wrote a book, but it looks like it's coming soon, right?
Yeah,
You don't
it's coming
have okay.
soon. Bibliotherapy in the Bronx. It's on
Bibliotherapy,
pre-order, y'all.
yes.
Pre-order it, y'all.
Oh, trust me,
April 29, 2025. Okay. So I'm curious. I wanted to ask you, we'll come back to that, but I wanted to ask you about your writing process. First of all, why did you want to write that book? And then what was your process of writing? Did you?
I love that question so much because I've been looking forward to talking about my writing process. So many people always ask me for book prescriptions, but like I want to get into the roots because it was shadow work. I didn't realize I've always like been a writer, right? To some degree, like I've written poetry and essays and I've been published for like think pieces and stuff like that. But to actually write a book and to do it like to be traditionally published too, because with trad publishing, there's so many eyes on your book. There's so many like stakeholders in your book, and you have to really stand 10 toes down on what you have to say, how you want to say it, right? Like when my copy editor gave me her feedback, there were so many things that she was pushing back on. And I'm like, no, that's African American vernacular. We're going to keep that in there. I said what I said, and I wrote it that way for a reason. And so this was a process for me that was like deeply traumatic, enlightening, lots of root work, lots of shadow work, lots of spiritual work, lots of relying on spirit, lots of discomfort. I'm not somebody who likes the spotlight. And so literacy has kind of like thrust me in the spotlight, and then the book deal, right? So like I don't have a choice but to really be seen and share my story. And there's a lot of vulnerable parts of the book where I write about my mom being a teen mom, having me at 15. I write about my grandmother being a curandera, but never telling me that, because when we grew up and she was raising me, we went to church 5 days a week, and it was like, no, we're Christian, but at the same time in the basement, I'm seeing all your altar materials, and like, I know there's something up, right? I read about my dad who, my mom was 15, he was, I believe, 17. He goes to the army because teen dad, how's he going to provide? He gets addicted to cocaine, comes back to America, gets addicted to crack. I read about my aunt with paranoid schizophrenia babysitting me, and how from the age of a young girl, I'm like looking around me and I'm seeing all this mental illness that everybody's trying to pray away, but things are just like getting progressively worse. There's a lot of me in the book. There's a lot of personal stories in the book. I had to have a lot of uncomfortable conversations with family members to get their permission to be in the book. But then there's also like a lot of my work in the therapy room in the book, which is really exciting because my clients get a chance to see their stories reflected. And when I started like drafting up their case studies, lots of tears were flowing, lots of, oh my God, like, thank you for wanting to share, my story, because the work that we do in the therapy room is so personal and nobody sees it, right? So there's a way that like putting it on the page helps the client to like see themselves like, well, I did that. Like we did this healing work together. And there's like orgullo and pride in that. So that's really why I wanted to write the book, because I know as a Black woman, as a Puerto Rican woman, as a mother to a child with a disability, right? As somebody who is like trying to daydream and craft a life where my children can have more than I had, my number one priority is breaking generational curses, building something new so that my daughter can thrive in her life. I don't want to be famous. I don't want to be like the spokesperson for bibliotherapy. I just want to raise happy, healthy children. But I also know that like I do great work as a therapist. I know my gift and I know my call, and I take that very seriously. And so if there's like a generation of therapists who value this modality and want to learn more, not from the lens of like, you have to be trained in this, you have to have a MSW and a PhD and go here and get that credential and this credential. And like, if I can leave a legacy behind that says, no matter who you are, no matter what class you come from, no matter the level of education you have, bibliotherapy is ours and we're doing it. Our ancestors did it. Like, you can do it too. And if you so choose to become a healer or a social worker or a therapist and you want to specialize in bibliotherapy, you can do it too. It's not about letters after your name. It's about spirit. It's about how you walk in the world. It's about how you use your gifts to be of service to our community. Then I did what I came to do. That's why I wanted to write the book, because I can't be traveling. I can't be somebody who is on a plane every month trying to promote bibliotherapy and go and be a keynote speaker everywhere and do all the things. But I can write a book that says, hey, here's my blueprint, and maybe you can make it your own.
So did you write an hour a day just when something came to you? Were you like on a track, or you just look up and say, oh, I have a book. Let me get it edited and publish it?
Well, I had been working on this book for like 10 years. So I had like bits and pieces of it already, sort of like, some of it was just like already ideated and some of it was already on the page. I participated in a writer's program at Row House Publishing. The president, Bex, read my manuscript and she was like, oh, we're giving you a book deal. And I was like, really? And she was like, yeah, like, do you think you can write this book in a year? And I'm like, I don't know. Can I write this book in a year? But one thing I love about Row House is they give you part of your book advance in advance. So that helped me because to me, I'm like, I got to pay for my son's speech therapy, OT therapy, physical therapy. Like I got bills. I can't just not work and see clients to write this book. So when she told me, no, Row House, we're really big on giving, marginalized authors book deals. And this is how we work. So we'd be able to give you 50% of the book advance up front so you could write the book. I was like, okay, say less. I will get this done in a year. And another thing I love about Row House is they give you an editor. You don't have to pay. I still ended up paying for an outside editor because I wanted to have like a Black woman look at my book and really make it, culturally relevant. But they gave me an editor. She was lovely. I love Nirmala so much. And then I had the editor that I hired. So it was I'm not going to make it sound like, oh, it was just like this easy process, but I had a lot of support along the way. And Row House, and their book contract is public. You could go to the Row House website right now and you can read their contracts. Every author gets the same contract. It's very transparent. It's very equitable. And so I don't think I could have written this book without Row House being my publisher. And I'm very grateful to them for that. I did write every day, sometimes while breastfeeding, sometimes while, it was nap time, sometimes on the city bus or in line at the grocery store, right? Like at my little phone app. I was always making notes, jotting things down, because another thing about being a writer is like you think that your project is going to look one way, but God has another plan. So it's just like anytime that I would get inspired or, after a therapy session where a client was very emotive or felt very connected to a piece of literature that we shared or wrote a poem, I'd make a note or I'd ask the client for permission, like, oh my God, I really love um what you wrote in response to this poem. Would you be okay with me writing about that? And sometimes clients were like, oh, hell no, I don't want this shared. And some clients would be like, really, you're writing a book and you want to share this? Yes, like you have my permission. So really like just being spirit led in that way, like whenever it felt like, okay, this is a powerful moment and this could probably help somebody else, I just like make a little note. And honestly, a lot of my writing happened at 3 a.m. I'd get up, I'd feel inspired, and I'd just write for like an hour or 2 hours until I fall back asleep. Um,
That's my
you
process
gotta like,
right about now.
right?
Yeah, but for different reasons. I'm in a different phase of life. So sometimes I'm up like this
Yeah,
at,
yeah.
2 and 3
I love
o'clock.
that time. Well, listen, they say it's the witching hour, right? So this is also like a deeply inspirational time at night. The world is quiet. You can be alone with your own thoughts and really turn inward. Writing is such a deeply spiritual process. So I'm not surprised to hear that you also write at 3 a.m.
So I've heard of art therapy. Is bibliotherapy a form of art therapy?
Yeah, so there's an
Mhm.
umbrella that's the creative arts therapies. And under that umbrella, you've got dance therapy, theater therapy,
Mhm.
art therapy, music therapy, bibliotherapy, hip hop therapy.
Yeah,
So
okay.
it's part of the
I got
creative
it.
arts therapies. Yeah, so if you were interested in any of the modalities under the creative arts therapy umbrella, that's something you should ask your therapist when you're shopping for a therapist. Ask them, hey, do you utilize any of the creative arts therapy methods? And if so, which? And if you're training or you've trained in any of the modalities, where did you train? That'd be a great way to interview a therapist.
Okay. Um,
Okay. Um, I have a question, and this is more an exploratory question because it's something that Angela and I kind of talked about as a possible future topic. But I know that you are Spanish speaking, and we talked about the impact that language could
Mm,
possibly have on reading, just in selecting what you read and that sort of thing. So I guess I'm looking for my question. I guess I was wondering if you thought, since you are you speak more than one language, if maybe you had a thought on this.
absolutely. I always ask my clients, especially those who have a different native tongue than English, what language they want to read in. That's a very important question for bibliotherapy because our memories are recorded, right, in our native languages, especially early memories, depending on what language you were speaking at the time that the event happened, right? Like, how did the
Mhm.
event get recorded in your memory? When we talk about traumatic memories as well, like trauma deeply impacts the way memories get recorded. And so it might seem like a small thing thinking about, okay, well, what language do I read in? But it's actually a really big thing when we talk about engaging with text, especially emotionally engaging with text. And so in my book, I actually have this is probably my favorite case study in the book, the case of Maite, a Dominican elder who I counseled, I don't want to give too much away because it's in the book, but
Okay.
she came to me referred by her daughters after having a traumatic event and losing some of her memories. And so, long story short, she ended up seeing a copy of Sandra Cisneros, The House on Mango Street, on my bookshelf. But I had my copy in my therapy office was in Spanish. And so as we started reading the text in Spanish, some of her memories come back. And it's such a powerful reminder, right, of the importance of considering this question of, do we read in English or do we read in our native language? And for me, it even in my own personal practice, right, like it's very therapeutic for me to read certain texts in Spanish, especially the Bible, because I grew up with my grandma going to church 5 days a week, sometimes six. And when I read scripture, I reflect on it differently when I read it in Spanish because those memories are recorded in Spanish in my psyche.
Wow. Wow. That reminds me of my son, which is interesting. So when we still were in the States, I put him in an immersion school when he was 4. So he started speaking Spanish at age 4. And he was a very both of my children were early readers because, I'm a reader.
Yeah.
So and so he started reading when he was 4, but for school, they were teaching him to read. He already knew how to read. So it was good that he could focus all of his energy on learning to read in Spanish. So
Yeah.
as he continued at the school, and he was there from age 4 to age 9. So as he was there, his teachers would talk about how he was a strong reader, period, but he was a stronger reader in Spanish, which was interesting. And so
Wow.
now, fast forward all these years, we're in a Spanish speaking country. We live in a Spanish speaking country. And when we got here, he was 13. He's now 16. He is he goes to a local school. I mean, there's no English being spoken.
That's amazing.
They have English class. So there's some English spoken in English class, but I just marvel at him sometimes because, he's a teenager. And so sometimes, he's not feeling like school or whatever. But sometimes I have to remind myself that he is in high school in another language. Like he's taking chemistry in Spanish and
Wow.
math in Spanish. So it's second nature to him now. He doesn't he's the only American in his school. But people don't know. Like they didn't know. He said what gave it away for his classmates or schoolmates is his tennis shoes. That's how they knew he was American.
He's a sneakerhead.
Uh,
He's a
as
sneakerhead.
much as he can be because he's a sneakerhead on somebody else's dime.
Right.
But his dad is always bringing him, he grumbles when he asks him, I want these, I want these, I want these. But then when he comes back, of course, he has them. So they said that's how they knew he was American. So
I love that though, because
fascinating
that's
to
so
me.
American and that's so Black boy American.
Right. But it's fascinating, this idea of language. I went to a book event for Afrotica here, a poet, and we plan to have her on a future episode. But she's working on her English, so she's kind of nervous about that. And I said, well, we'll have someone on with you that can translate, because we really don't want language to be a barrier to being on the podcast, because especially she's a local writer, so we want her on, you know what I mean? But so yeah, I thank you for sharing that, because I really was curious about language in your practice and your thoughts about it with reading, because
Yeah.
I'm always curious about that.
Yeah, I've recently started reading in Spanish again. It's something that I don't know, in releasing my book, I just miss my grandma so much. And I've been trying to be more intentional with like setting up my ancestral altar, having her pictures around so the kids could see her. And it was my therapist who was like, why don't you start reading the Bible in Spanish again, rereading her favorite scriptures. This is all symbolic ceremonial bibliotherapy, really. And so I was like, I wonder, if I could find some of my favorite novels in Spanish. And so that's a little thing I'm doing for myself now as I grieve my grandmother's memory. And I just wish she could be here in the physical. I know she's here in the spiritual, but I've been listening to like Anthony Santos, a lot of her favorite bachateros, her old school songs that she used to play in the house, while cleaning on Saturday mornings. And that's healing too. So language is so important.
I have a question in terms of healing and parenthood. I was curious about what books, if you can think of any, that you feel helped you in preparing to and in being a parent, like on your parenting journey.
I love that question so much. That's a big part of my book as well, because I write about finding the book. When my son was diagnosed with autism, I couldn't find any books for like Black mothers raising Black autistic boys. And then I found an indie book after doing some research called We Dare Be Brave, The Emotional Journey of Raising. It's We Dare Be Brave, The Emotional Journey of Raising Children with Disabilities for African American Mothers. And when I tell you that book was like a salve to my spirit, it allayed all my worries. These women, they're three friends, all raising autistic Black boys, all doing amazing work in their communities in different ways. And at the end of the book, in the afterword, Selena Miller writes a letter to the reader, and she says, if you're struggling with your child's diagnosis, email me. So I actually email her because at this point, it just happened. My son was just diagnosed. It's 2020. The world is on fire. Everything is shutting down. I can't get the early intervention set up for him. My daughter was just born, right? We had moved to South Carolina so I could give birth to her safely because in New York City, they weren't allowing your partner to be in the room when you were in labor. And there was just so much going on. So I emailed her. And when I tell you she emailed me back that next morning, and she said, whatever you need, I'm here for you. And she told me about her organization, Mother to Mother, specifically catered to Black women raising autistic children. I signed up for her organization that same day. I started going weekly to their virtual meetings. And these women aren't from New York City, but they embraced me. They took me under their wing. They shared resources with me. I get emotional because I thought I was just looking for a book and I ended up finding this amazing community. So, whew, that chapter, I cried a lot while writing because I wanted to really drive home the point that we think that we're isolated and we think that we're alone and we think like, oh, we're just like nerdy readers who like to like stay at home and read books all day, but books connect us. Books connect us, writing our stories connects us. And I never thought after reading that book that I would find a whole community of Black moms that just like took me under their wing. So that book means a lot to me. And ironically, Selena, Miss Pat, everybody's name is failing me right now because I'm emotional, but
I'm looking at the cover. Sharice Montgomery.
Reese Montgomery, who has an organization not just for autistic or neurodivergent children, but for children with medical needs who are medically fragile. I've learned so much from Sharice. She's phenomenal. But they were the first IG Live that I ever did for Literacy. So supportive to me in building my practice, connecting me with people. These women are dope, y'all. So that book was game changing for me. There's so many though, like Uniquely Human is another one. There's a lot of books that I've read on autism in particular because it never occurred to me that I might be on the spectrum. And I score very highly as being on the spectrum because we did this when my son was diagnosed and you have good insurance, right? They ask you to go see a neurologist, go see all these providers and build a medical team for your child. And we got accepted into this program at Mount Sinai. And we did all the genetic testing and all that to try to like trace it through our lineages, me and my husband. Nothing came out genetically, and the assessment tools that they provided, I scored as really high as probably being on the spectrum. And that was mind blowing for me because, yeah, I agree with everything they said. And it's like, how many Black women are on the spectrum, right? And we would never know because we're Black women and we're just expected to be, I don't know, smart, bookish, intelligent, figuring it out, right? Like nobody would identify Black girls being on the spectrum unless you have behavioral issues or externalized behavioral concerns that would, make someone want to test you. And also, I was a foster kid after my grandma died. So, like, nobody, and I had great grades and, I was very independent. But looking back at my life, I'm like, oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. A lot of the things I struggled with being, highly anxious, just like my inner world, right? And so my son begins to grow up and I begin to see parallels between him and my inner child. And I'm like, oh my God, am I on the spectrum? So I've read any book on autism, I've read it. I've studied it. That has been a huge part of my parenting journey as well. And with my baby girl, there's a lot. There's a lot. I could go on and on about Quest. I named her Quest because getting her here was a quest. But also it's been there's nothing that holds up a mirror to you like having a daughter. And I wasn't mothered. I was grandmothered. I wasn't mothered. So I wasn't prepared for how illuminating, challenging it would be to raise a little Black girl. And my daughter's a Taurus, and where my son is, non-speaking, she's very verbal. And she's 4 going on 14. So anything and everything that I could read about raising a Black girl, I'm reading it. And I can't think of a title at the moment. And honestly, it's not necessarily parenting books that have helped me with Quest. The title that comes to mind right now is Imagination by Ruha Benjamin, all about the legacy of Black women in our ancestry who have been daydreamers, visionaries, right? Like Harriet Tubman saw the possibility of helping our people escape from bondage before she made it happen. So, like, what does it mean to have an imagination that makes other things possible beyond the limitations that society places on us? My daughter is not limited by anything. She wants to try everything. And I want to keep that, in her core. I want to feed that and nurture that. So ironically, for my daughter, it's not a lot of parenting books necessarily, but it's a lot of books that I'm reading written by Black women writers, some of whom are not mothers themselves, but are visionaries or just very strong energy in the world that needs to be expressed.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now I have one other question because I've heard you repeatedly say Black woman, Black woman, Black woman. I'm curious about your favorite Black male writer, if you have a favorite Black male writer or some of your favorites.
Yeah, fiction or nonfiction?
Fiction or nonfiction?
Absolutely. I mean, like historically, of course, like the greats. I love Walter Mosley. I love Paul Beatty. I love Dr. Daniel Black. Of course, James Baldwin. All of our classic poets, Langston Hughes, Claude McKay, Richard Wright, Sibo Campbell.
Yeah, I knew he was gonna come up again.
That's
Skyful of Elephant.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yep. I read a lot of Black men as well. I'm gonna just always, if I get the space to express anything, I'm gonna just always uplift the women first. But I definitely love reading my brothers. I'm trying to think of like recent up and coming authors. You know who I love? His name is escaping me right now. He wrote We Are a Haunting, Tyreek White. That brother could write his behind off. And of course, Kiese Lehman. Come on now. Like there's no greater writer than Kiese right now. Yeah, those are just a few.
Okay. All right. And then I have one more question and then I'll let you, Ayoka. In the process of writing your book, what did you love most about it and what was the most challenging part of it? And I know you talked a lot about Row House. Oh, but okay, so aside from, your experience with the publishing company, what did you love most and what was most challenging?
I loved most that somebody saw me enough to want to offer me a book deal. My inner child, like this is literally my inner child's wildest dream to write a book, to have it published, not so much to market it and to get people to buy it, but just to have written it. So that's what I love. I love that, like, I'm gonna grow old one day and,
You have a book.
cross over and I'll have a book out there and somebody's gonna pick it up and they're gonna know about the work that I've done and maybe build off the work that I've done. Hopefully that's the prayer, right? The thing I didn't love so much is that it's so isolating.
Mhm.
And you think like certain people are gonna like root for you and support you, and then there's like no one to be found, which is not completely true, but that's what it feels like
Feels like.
emotionally, because you want the support to come from specific people. But your family is your family, right? And your homegirls are your homegirls. Like, to them, I'm just M. It's like, girl, we proud of you. We gonna buy your book, but like, you're just M to us, right?
Right.
So that wasn't so much fun, because I also think that once you get an opportunity like that or you become visible, some people do start to put you on a pedestal or forget that you're just you. Like, I'm who I was 5 years ago. I'm just coming out with a book. It's not, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not on some ego trip of like, y'all need to read my book and I'm, the bibliotherapist that y'all need to. No, that's not the energy that I come with, but because of other people's insecurities or projections or competitive nature, whatever it is, right? Like, people will project onto you their own fears.
Their stuff.
Yeah. And so I've lost a lot of friends through this process. Honestly, not by intention, but just because you realize that as you do say yes to spirit and you answer the call on your life, not everybody can come with you, or some people's energy is just not pure, their heart is not in the right place, and I don't want that for myself. I want to be surrounded by people who are genuinely happy for me and who see, like, this is hard work. I'm not getting these opportunities because I'm just chilling doing therapy. No, I'm putting in the work. I'm showing up every day. I'm really trying hard to like live in that discomfort, but I also it doesn't come naturally to me, right? Like, what comes me and my husband joke about this all the time. Like, what comes naturally to me is being a homebody, reading books, raising my babies and supporting my clients. It doesn't come naturally to me to like show up on, in public spaces and be a keynote speaker and go on podcasts and talk about who I am and what I do. That doesn't come naturally to me. It's actually very anxiety provoking. And after something like this, maybe not with you two ladies, because your energy is so beautiful, I feel so full right now, but like sometimes I come from opportunities or conversations and I'm drained. I need like a week to recover. And maybe that's, my autistic brain. But like it takes a lot of energy, a lot of spirit work, a lot of heart work to show up every day and to be seen, because people will misunderstand you, or people see what they want to see. You could be the most pure-hearted person with the greatest intentions, and especially for Black women, there's so many stereotypes that we have to subvert, and prejudice is real. And I think about this all the time. I'm like, if I were a white woman coming out and saying, hey, I'm a bibliotherapist, how much more support would I receive if I were an Ella Berthoud, right? And ironically, Ella Berthoud she's been an inner mentor for quite some time, but she actually reached out to me and congratulated me and, wants to do an Instagram live. And I'm excited about that, but I'm also slightly terrified because I'm like, oh my God, she sees me and she like values my work, which is a blessing, but it's also, and I've told her this, like, it does make me wonder, like, if I were a white man, if I were a white woman, right? Like, would I be dealing with some of the things that I sometimes have to deal with? I never talk about it, not publicly. My therapist knows, but like, it hasn't always been easy, is what I'm saying.
But it wouldn't be fire like it is if that was the case. Because they can't do it like we do it. Come on.
You right. You right. You right about that. You right about that.
So I want to ask you real quick. We always ask our guests, what does writing while Black mean to you?
It means writing from my core of who I am and not trying to be anybody else. It's writing for and to my people. That's what it means. See, I ain't concerned about the white gaze at all. I'm really not. And I think that's why I love Sibo Campbell so much, right? Like, he couldn't have written Sky Full of Elephants if he was concerned about who it would ruffle.
Right.
But that's what makes the book so healing for our people and our community. And we need that.
So I want you to talk about bibliotherapy in the Bronx. Blow it up. Where can we pre-order? All that good stuff. Come on.
Yeah, Bibliotherapy in the Bronx comes out April 29th, 2025. It's an exploration of the use of literature to heal. I explore Black librarianship pretty deeply, honoring some of the, because there are many, some of the major contributors to bibliotherapy, specifically in marginalized communities like the Bronx. Dr. Sadie Peterson Delaney, for example, she was the head librarian at Tuskegee, hired by the Schomburg in New York City to come and curate their bibliotherapy library. A lot of people don't know her name, which is problematic because she's known as the godmother of bibliotherapy. And so writing this book was really an opportunity for me to write our ancestors into the literature on Books to Heal. I'm really excited about it. I hope people buy the book and feel inspired by it. I never finished my training with the International Federation of Bibliopoetry Therapy. I don't know if I will, to be quite honest with you. And I write pretty honestly in the book about credentialism and how a lot of these educational programs gatekeep. I really want people to understand like the usefulness of literature to heal as a self-healing practice outside of any formalized education or institution. At the same time, I do want this book to be used in education settings, in classrooms, right, in social work programs. I think there's the beautiful thing about this book is how accessible it is. It's not strictly academia. It's many things. It's layered, it's textured, it's real, it's down to earth. And I'm just really excited for it to be in the world and for people to read it and get a sense of like, just like who we are as a people, how literature has always anchored us in our truth and our history, to our ancestors, to our lineage, to ourselves. I also explore hip hop therapy, poetry therapy in the book. A huge shout out to a lot of the hip hop artists from the Bronx. The book is very New York, absolutely, but you don't have to be from New York to understand. Because I also, amplify some of our greatest poets, Nikki Giovanni, Sonia Sanchez, and current greats like Joelle Leon. New York Weekend Poets as well. So there's a lot in there and I'm really excited about it. And yeah, you can pre-order it on Barnes & Noble, on Books A Million, Simon & Schuster's website, Amazon. Amazon tends to have delays. Like I like when I pre-order a book to get my book on pub day. So if that's your thing, probably don't go through Amazon. But I also have a few indie local like virtual bookstores from the Bronx carrying my book, the Bronx Witch Headquarters Bookstore and Tuma's Books as well. There's also a few indie bookstores on Bookshop who have picked up the book. So I know people are starting to acquire it. I've been emailing libraries and indie bookstores across the country to acquire the book. People don't always like respond, so I don't always know who's acquired it, but I know that people are starting to acquire it because people are telling me that they're pre-ordering from these places. So as I learn more, I'll continue to share on my monthly newsletter and on social media where you can get the book. But for now, that's mainly where you can get it. And it's out April 29th. So it's lit.
Okay. So are you on your social spaces? Are you no, say it for me.
Literapy.
Literapy. Underscore
Yes.
NYC. Is that your handle across platforms?
Yeah, so we recently moved to Massachusetts and I've been grappling with that because I'm like, do I get rid of the NYC now that I'm not there anymore?
No.
So I changed it up. No, I'm gonna keep it. I'm gonna keep it on social because I have so much content. But yeah, on socials, it's at literapy_NYC. And on my website, I'm just changing it to like Literapy by Emely Rumble. But on social, it will stay at literapy_NYC. And that's TikTok, Threads, Instagram, Facebook.
All the places.
And all the places. And then my website is academy.literapynyc.com. And that's like all the things. I've got ebooks on there. I've got my bibliotherapy course on there. It's an intro to bibliotherapy. It's a 1-hour webinar where I kind of take you through the basics. I've got a bunch of like book prescriptions. You can join my book club, all my links, all the things are on my website.
Okay. And I'll be putting them all in the description of this
Okay.
episode.
I like that you said it's layered, it's textured, it's real, it's down to earth. Is that your book that you were talking about?
That's my
And I'm like, it's you. That's you. You're layered, you're textured, you're real, you're down to earth. I'm like, that should be your
Thank you.
tagline.
Thank you. I love that. It's a lot of me in the book.
Yeah, I imagine. I can see that. We usually try to add, or we're starting to try to ask a question about marketing as authors and what has been effective, or what if people have stumbled upon anything that has worked for them as an author. I'm kind of curious about from the other side, like, how do you find out about independent authors? If you do you ever have authors who just are like, read my book? My book is like, has anyone ever effectively kind of caught your attention that wasn't on your radar, that didn't have a big machine behind them or a little machine behind them?
I got to keep it real with y'all on this question because I really want to help authors. And there's so many great writers who just do it wrong. Like, I get really annoyed when people slide in my DM with like, read my book, because I just feel like, come on, if you stand 10 toes down behind your work and you know it's good, you'll look up my email address. You'll send me a formal email. Right? Like, there's a way that like that initial request or that initial introduction really matters. And I feel like as Black writers, we don't always like value our work that way. You can't slide into someone's DM. Somebody like me, you know that I'm getting book mail every day. You know that I'm getting requests every day. And you know that I don't promote everybody's book. I got to read it first. I'm a therapist. I'm not a book influencer. I keep telling people that. So like it just rubs me the wrong way when somebody's like, oh, or if somebody sends me a book that's unsolicited and then gets an attitude with me because I haven't promoted it. It's like, well, I never agreed to promote it. I don't get paid to promote books. Right? Like that would be an ethical issue as a bibliotherapist. So in the legacy of Dr. Sadie Peterson Delaney, I have relationships with publishers. I have relationships with indie houses, publishing houses, and I do a tremendous amount of research. So just like any great book influencer would do, right? Like I'm always perusing the websites and the shelves and being in conversation with folks in the publishing world to see what's coming out next and looking up who other people are reading, right? Because I think that's an important part of my journey too, is that I started off in the reader community before I became an author. So I had already sort of had a established presence with readers and publishing houses who kind of knew that I promote Black literature. This is the kind of literature that I like to read. And so I do a tremendous amount of research, but I'm grateful that now I've reached the point in my career where a lot of the good stuff comes to me. And so I do get a lot of solicitation, but I love when I get like an email that tells me like who you are, what the title of your book is. If you want to send it to me, you know, ask me. Don't just assume I want to read it. Like say, hey, if you're interested in reading, I'd love to send you a copy. I prefer hardcover finished books, but I often accept paperback art. So that's another thing when you're asking someone to read your book, like make sure that you're considering who they are as a reader and their preferences, right? So I love when someone will say, hey, I can send you the PDF or a digital book or a finished copy or a galley. Like give me options. Let me know what my options are. Let me choose. It's kind of like, you know, when you go to a buffet, there's an array of options and you get to pick your choice, your taste. So like the way that people approach me really matters to me, because when I'm asking something of someone, I'm doing it with class, with grace, with humility. Like I'm not just coming at you like, hey, read my book. You know what I mean? So that's the best advice that I could give. Like have a website, or at least some kind of like resource that shows people who you are. If you don't have a website, create like a one-pager, a media page that tells people your name, who you are, what genre you write in, what the title of your book is, and things like that. I think that's really important, just to be prepared, be planned, be prepared, be intentional. Readers love that. Like for me, I'm doing free bookmarks. Like the first 50 people to pre-order my book, I'm sending them a Literapy NYC bookmark. I made these bookmarks on my own, but it's getting me a lot of pre-orders because people want a bookmark and I'm handwriting every note. Also, the energy in a handwritten letter is different than me typing it up. I've received beautiful letters from authors that are typed up and I don't mind, but I just know as a spiritual therapist, there's an energy involved in me sitting down at my desk, writing the letter, signing it, right, and sending it off with a bookmark. So you got to know your readership. You just got to be intentional. You know, it takes nothing to like, you wrote the book, you did the work. Now, like, put a little extra something on it, It's like you're not gonna make chicken without seasoning it, right? You're gonna make sure that chicken is well seasoned, right? Nobody want bland chicken. So that's my best advice.
Ma'am, I'm a vegetarian. I'm just,
Oh,
but I
okay.
do season
Well,
them
I was gonna
beans. I
say,
season my food, but I just
there you
said.
go. I'm sure you season them greens. Like,
My choreographer always talks about first we do this, then we put the hot sauce on it. So you done wrote the book, now put the hot sauce on it.
there you go. That's
all
the
right.
best piece of advice.
I got you. Okay. Ayoka, it looked like you were about to say something, but
No,
I'm not.
no, I'm just I got all my questions in.
I guess the only other note I have, and it's not really a question, but just how reading and writing opens up the world and worlds. Not just reading has opened up the world for me, but writing opens up the world in another way. So I just really, when we were talking, I guess I thought about art therapy, but I've used bibliotherapy for myself, but the way that you're excited about it and you love your work, it makes sense to me because it's fabulous. What you do is so wonderful. So
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, writing, that's a whole nother aspect, right? But expressive writing is a very important part of bibliotherapy as well. So like, again, the intentionality, the mindfulness involved in writing practice, turning within and making sure that you're communicating what you want to say so that the reader can receive it with that intention. I didn't realize, like, I thought that I had certain chapters done, but then my copy editor reads it and she's reading it a certain way. And I'm like, oh no, that's not what I meant. Oh,
So
thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate you ladies, all these great questions and just the energy. I feel it and I'm grateful.
this has been good. I've been so excited and bugging Angela about this episode.
I gotta get to Costa Rica. I gotta come see y'all.
mhm.